overall, when it comes to the original design concept, the current game sticks to it very closely. The original concept was a first-person experience in which the player would traverse the world by analyzing different sound tones and avoiding obstacles as well as a robot AI. Although much of our original ideas were cut throughout development, most of all the core mechanics from our original initial vision remain. After a few weeks of prototyping, an idea surfaced to design our game around the visually impaired. We decided moving forward to make sure our game could not only be played by someone who is blind, but that person can play as effectively as someone with normal eyesight. This meant that every mechanic, obstacle, and even basic menu navigation had to have an audio feedback given to the player.
Creating a game for the blind. While the game was great to design and create with a blind person in mind, it was also very challenging. We had to focus on making a game that didn't give any advantages to a person who can see. This left us with a game that was visually a little boring. It also made us cut multiple ideas that would have given a person with sight an advantage over a person without sight.
When navigating the level, we originally had each level use the following methodology. Each tile the player could step on would emit one of 6 sound tones from acoustic guitar. Higher the tone meant danger, while lower the tone meant the player was relatively safe.
In the very early stages of the game, the sounds were extremely simple, just guitar sounds for danger tiles. One sound for each level of danger the player would experience. When we got some audio students to help us, they really gave us ideas about what the tiles could be, and transformed the game to something fun and different for each level.
When guys explained their concept in our first meeting, I immediately thought, wow, that's just awesome. They wanted to use sounds to guide people through the levels of their game, and for me, as a sound designer, that just, it's perfect. Then, me and Philip started gathering ideas, like what can we do, what kind of sounds can we come up with to make sure that people get enough feedback, that they would know when they're doing something right or wrong, and still not to be too repetitive so people don't get too annoyed with the sounds. And the sounds that we would have to come up with would kind of have to fit with music that would be in every level anyways. And then a simple yet beautiful solution came to us. It's music. The music is the sound that's going to guide people through every level. And all the sound effects that I would come up with would just help people to know for sure that yes, this is right and this is wrong. So I put together a couple sound effects that are actually the same throughout every level, but with slightly different pitch. This ensured that sound effects and music would work together in every level to create a really cool and immersive experience for any player. But with the solution came a problem. Why people hear those sounds? Why sounds guide them through the game? And mainly, what kind of sounds are they? To really answer those questions, I had to have some sort of visual feedback. Because if you think about it, sound is never the cause, it's always the effect. But all we really knew at the moment was that we would have tiles that would open one by one as we progressed through the level, and some of which would be friendly, some of which wouldn't. So I started thinking, what kind of mood are we going for? What kind of setting is that? And what's going on in this world? And the only more or less logical explanation I came up with was, it's a dream. Let's make it a dream. And then as I started thinking about it more and more, I thought, well, let's make it a dream of a little girl that by nature cannot see, and that's why she receives her world through sounds in everyday life, and her dreams are also full of sounds, full of beautiful music. So with every step, with every sound, Nocturnissa explores this world of her dreams, and her teddy bear acts as her mentor or guardian, if you wish. So Nocturnissa gets pulled into her dream more and more with every level, and you start noticing that music changes, mood changes. It becomes a nightmare for her, which she sure wants to escape. But at this point, it's not that easy anymore.
We implemented a new set of 6 tones throughout each level. These new set of 6 tones would be given to the player before their newest journey would even begin.
Level 1. Level 2. Level 3. Level 4. Level 5. Level 6.
The second thing that went really well while building Nocturnissa was implementing our tiles and grid-based movement. Because we were creating a game that blind people were going to play, we knew that the way the player was going to move had to be limited. If the players were able to move freely, then it was going to be impossible to really guide the players to the end of the level. So we decided that a grid-based movement would work best for players who were blind. Because the game was grid-based, we knew that we needed a way to show players who have sight some sort of visual aspect. We created the tiles, and initially they were all the same colors regardless of the level. As we kept iterating on the levels, we decided that things needed to change. We decided that each of the tiles would now have to be a different color to match the level. The tiles also really helped the group to build levels. They gave us a platform and a way to visually see what we wanted to do with each level.
Robot prototype. Prototyping. We didn't spend enough time prototyping our mechanics early in the project. If we had spent more time testing prototypes, we could have caught technical issues early, and we could have made important design choices earlier in the process. Working with ideas. We had a lot of ideas at the beginning of the project, and while this is good, we didn't solidify all of our ideas quick enough. Also, one of the problems that we had was not being able to let go of the ideas that we loved when changes were necessary.
Personally, I found the most challenging aspect of our project was to design a puzzle game for the blind. As a designer, I wanted to create a challenging system that was complex and highly unique to the player, while still making sure every aspect of our game had audio cues associated with it. The major difficulty lied in designing a logical puzzle system, and not one that relied on trial and error. The player is always given the option to move a single tile space north, south, east, or west, or skip a smooth stone along 3 tile spaces north, south, east, or west. The audio feedback given to the player after they made their move ranges differently from where they or the stone end up. Each of our levels was designed like a maze, requiring the player to find each level's exit tile. Since walls would have been boring obstacles, we created our levels to be expended high above the ground, meaning a single player mistake would have them falling to their death.
Oh no, back to the beginning.
The 6 sound tiles in each level indicate the closest falling danger in the horizontal or vertical direction. This worked well with our grid-based movement since the player can only move these directions. The tiles' numbers you see in front of you are calculated in a very precise manner. For instance, this number 5 tile. It's a number 5 because it first checks in all 4 directions, and doesn't stop counting until it reaches a falling space. As an example, if the tile north of this number 5 tile wasn't here, this 5 would become a 3 instead, or even a 2, or even a 1. Although these numbers do tell the player how close they are from a possible fall, we wanted to provide the player with as much feedback as possible, so death from falling was later split into 2 categories. The first is known as borders, which is currently indicated in white. If the player skipped a stone into this space, they would then know that this location was on the edge of the level. The second is known as the pit. If the player skipped a stone into this space, they would then know that this location was surrounded by 4 sound tiles in the vertical and horizontal direction. And of course, the 4 sound tiles surrounding a pit would always be 1s, since those indicate they're 1 tile away from a border or a pit.
Hear that? That's the sound of a pit. If you step into one of those, you'll get sucked out of the dream.
Yet the deductive reasoning aspect of our puzzle is what we wanted our player to focus on while within the micro-progression scale. In keeping with the same tile as an example, if the player can correctly understand that they are standing on a 5 tile, then they should eventually understand that they can move north, south, east, or west in a single direction, 4 additional tile spaces, without having to deal with the fear of falling. Since each individual tile is calculated on the X and Y axis, the player knows that moving directly from a 5 to a 1 will still allow them to travel 3 more spaces in the same direction safely.
As progression picked up during development, we looked for new features to add into Nocturnissa. After some great feedback, we decided to add Xbox 360 controller support. This allowed us to give players the sense of touch to use to help them navigate throughout the world. Using the Xbox 360 controller's rumble feature, the player can feel the rumbling is stronger or weaker as they get closer or farther away from silent dangers, such as pits and borders.
Aside from the micro-progression that was previously discussed in the tile-to-tile puzzle-like mechanic, it is also important for the player to understand the macro-progression within each level. I'd like to introduce Philip, one of our sound design members, whom helped us create zones throughout our levels and how these zones aided the player in proper macro-progression.
So I think the biggest goals of music implementation in this game was to provide layers of feedback based on music to the player, and also because the game itself is basically based on pitch memory, musical memory, or the tiles, basically, you being able to understand what the pitch of a tile tells you. I wanted that to work with the background music in a very musical way. So obviously they've got to match the key signature, they've got to match the songs, really. So that's why you hear a unique song for every level, and the sound effects are actually pitch adjusted, and the tiles themselves change instrumentation. So right now, I've been letting the music build musically. But in the game, it doesn't work that way. It's based on player input. Let's go back to the beginning. So this would be layer 1, or zone 1. The music is tied to where you are in the level. So, if you're making progress, you're going to pass into zone 2. You're going to hear a chime that fits in the key signature of the song, and the background music is going to get a little bit more complex. Now, in case you missed that, let's go back the other direction. This time, we're going to hear a negative chime, and the background music gets simpler. It's a fairly simple hotter, colder mechanic. It made me write the music with layers in mind, you know, how to keep things interesting as instruments are introduced one by one. And so now I'm just going to quickly level up through all the layers. And so now, there's only one layer left. But perhaps the biggest challenge laid against this original music design process was this question that, how do you know when you've reached the end, you know? How do you know that you're in the final zone where the exit is? Because everything's constantly getting more complicated. How do you know when it's finished? The solution that we chose was a sound that's unique to the exit, that emanates from the exit. It goes a little something like this. And so now, when I change into the final zone, you ought to be able to tell that the level is over, or at least that the exit is near. So now, let's change into the final zone. And now you know you're in the presence of the exit, and all that's left is for you to touch it to complete the level. And that is how you use music and sound to indicate direction.
Nocturnissa by Mutiny.